beautiful friends. It's Amanda here, and Nomad Cosmetics is celebrating their 10-year anniversary with a special relaunch of three fan favorite palettes. These have been updated with some formula tweaks and improvements. All of the outer packaging seems to be the same. So, we're going to deep dive into each individual palette, and I have a whole lot of comparisons that I want to share. But first, let me just give you some important info right out of the gate. These palettes are currently available on the Nomad site. They launched on Tuesday, June 3rd, so exactly 1 week ago, if my uploading schedule goes as planned. And there is currently special introductory pricing that should last until June 24th, where Nomad is offering these three anniversary palettes for 39 US dollars each. After that, the individual palette price will go back up to $44. You will be able to use coupon codes with either one of these prices, and I do have an affiliate code. It's just my first name, Amanda. That will save you 10% on almost anything on the Nomad site. And if you've seen many of my videos, I've done a lot of Nomad palette reviewing. I've been a big fan of Nomad for a while now. So I do actually have the originals for two out of the three of these re-released palettes. So, of course, I'm going to show you the old and new versions side by side. I'm starting with this Provence palette. This was a favorite of mine, and I'm really happy to see it return because I feel like this palette was very underrated and it was kind of ahead of its time. I mean, cool tones and also super bold, bright red eyeshadows had a huge moment, like well after this Provence palette dropped. I also really love the cover art. I love the really funky, bold vibes. I think this palette also is much more wearable than it might seem at first glance, especially because of that monochrome trio layout, these vertical trios of what could very easily translate into a three shadow look. This layout is super user friendly and it's also just very pleasing to the eye for me. I like this style of organizing the shadows in the palette. And as much as I really loved this palette when I first reviewed it, I have to say I do like the updated version even more. They reformulated the shimmers, which I think you can kind of tell just by looking at them. But, keep in mind that these old versions are a couple years old palettes at this point as well, too. So they reformulated the shimmers to make them more foily and metallic. I love a foily, super metallic lid look, so I'm not mad at the new shimmers at all. Now, you can definitely tell a difference seeing the updated version on top and the older version below. The mattes are pretty much the same, but the shimmers, you can really tell a difference, especially when you look close up. I'll also show you these shimmer shades just swatched right up close to each other without the mattes in between, but I wanted to give you a chance to examine all of the shades. And I just want to remind you here that I will link any relevant videos down in the description box because I do have some individual reviews, tutorials, rankings, things like that. So if there's ever a relevant related video, I try my best to put that in the description box for you to make it easy for you to click over to what you want to know more about. So make sure you check there and just take a look at these shimmers side by side. I feel like this is one of those if you know situations because at first glance, yes, the colors are the same. They didn't change the shade. They really just changed the texture. That base is a lot stronger. The shades are not only shinier, sparklier, but they're also just more opaque in general. Whereas previously, some of the shimmers had a little bit of a sparkly topper type of feeling with a more transparent base. These are more intense in your face, clearly very metallic, not topper type of shades. When it came time for me to pull palettes for comparisons with the Provence palette, I really struggled. I do think this is quite a unique color story. So I decided to combine some shadows from the Fuji Five Lakes palette as well as the Verona Love and Death palette. I really like the Fuji Five Lakes in a similar way that I like the Provence palette. I do think they have a similar vibe, especially with that bold red and bold yellow kind of primary presence in the palettes. But I did need especially these cooler tones and purples to come from the Love and Death palette. So these made quite a decent comparison, in my opinion. Certainly not exact dupes, but I do think that you could really get a lot of the same looks, the same feelings, vibes. I mean, you could even probably recreate a Provence palette tutorial if you had both of these other Nomad palettes. So this was truly the best in brand comparison I could come up with. But let me know if you have any other comparisons that you want to see, and I can always make a YouTube short or a reel or something to add some more comparisons if that would be helpful to you. Now, I'm going to move on to the other palette that I do have the original of. This is the America's Parks palette. Now, I purchased my original America's Parks palette in a little bundle during a Black Friday sale many, many moons ago. And honestly, it didn't get a ton of use from me. I didn't review it for my channel. I bought it for, personal enjoyment, which it worked out well for me because it ends up benefiting the channel anyway. But I don't have as many strong feelings, or I don't even have as much experience using this palette compared to the Provence palette. But what I lack in my opinions on this palette, I can more than make up for with a whole lot of in brand comparisons. As far as the comparison to the old version of the palette goes, I don't think it's quite as cut and dry for me what the updated shades are, because I do feel like a lot of the mattes in the updated palette are improved as well. But again, this could also be just a function of age. Like I said, I've had this old palette for many, many years, so it may just be that the efficacy of these formulas have waned over time, which absolutely could be the case. But I will say that as far as the texture, opacity, just the overall feel of the shadows, they feel definitely richer. They feel more pigmented. They feel smoother. I think the old version mattes feel quite dry to me. And similarly to the Provence palette, these new updated palette shimmers seem a lot more silky, a lot more opaque, and definitely a lot more sparkle, particularly when you look up close and you can really see the reflection of those individual little shimmer particles. It just seems like they're not only more opaque, but they're also more bright and sparkly, which again, I love. I am a shimmery, sparkly eyelid girl, so I much prefer the updated palette here. I really appreciate the reformulation a lot more here in comparison to the Provence palette that we just looked at. I think that one was definitely improved, but this one is most improved because across the board, the shadows are much, much better for me performance wise in this updated palette. Next, we have a whole lot of neutral plus green palette comparison. This has been a much more popular color story in the Nomad line than I really realized until I started pulling these palettes to do the comparisons. Of course, the first thing that came to mind for me was this Ireland Wild Atlantic Way palette. I think that America's Parks leans a little bit more orangey warm, and the Ireland palette does have a lot more greens and some very prominent blue shades as well. But in general, I'd say these are a pretty darn decent match. Maybe the best one of this round of comparisons. I next went to the Chicago Speakeasy palette. This packaging is so pretty. I really think it's one of their best. Should I do a ranking Nomad palettes just based on their packaging video? Because I think that would be fun, but I also think that's way more subjective than ranking like eyeshadows in a palette. Speaking of eyeshadows in a palette, when it comes to comparing the Speakeasy palette here, you can see right off the bat there's a lot more purple going on in the Chicago palette versus America's Parks. And we're definitely lacking some of those really prominent bright greens. But in general, I think these look more similar swatched side by side than they do in the palettes for some reason. Maybe it's a trick of the backgrounds as well, since Speakeasy has a really dark palette background and Parks is lighter. But I think when they're swatched here, you could definitely pull some similar looks from these two palettes. Not quite as close as the Ireland palette, though. Yet another US based location. This is a more recent release. This is America's Route 66 palette. This is a larger palette, and I will say, when it comes to comparison swatches, the larger palettes just have more shades to pull from. So I do think that it's easier for this one to be a better match just by virtue of more shades. But it's hard to deny this is pretty much just as good of a dupe as the Ireland Atlantic Way palette, in my opinion. We are lacking that deepest shimmer shade. I didn't even have anything worth swatching there to compare. But other than that, we have a lot of similar shades and shadows. And I do think that ultimately, if you have one of these, it's probably not worth it to have the other one. That's just one gal's opinion, though. So maybe there's one particular shade you're really after. That could be the deciding factor. I do want to compare America's Parks to this Berlin Underground palette. This is the new release palette that I don't have the original version of. So I don't have an older palette to compare the Berlin one to. I really like this color story. I am responding very positively to it being very shimmery. I love a mustardy yellow. I love purple. I like silver. I like green. A lot of my favorite eyeshadow colors are combined here. It's also giving sort of a grungy, fallish type of aesthetic, which is absolutely right up my alley. But when it comes down to it, this is not so dissimilar from the America's Parks palette. I do think it's a bit more neutral, especially where those bright green shades are concerned. But I also don't think that you need both of these either. So, again, that's just one girl's opinion. I do think these are what I would call too close for comfort. They're not dupes, but they're pretty similar. They're giving similar eye looks. Now, let's give the Berlin Underground palette its dues. I want to show you the same close ups, even though I can't compare the packaging because I don't have the old version. I still want you to see the outer packaging here. And I'm going to show you a few more comparisons. I'm not going to re-compare Berlin Underground to the same palettes that I use to compare to America's Parks because these are so similar, so you can just kind of extrapolate. Hopefully that makes sense. But I am going to swatch this one with two of the most beloved neutral palettes from Nomad Cosmetics. First up is this Okavango Safari palette. This has that fuzzy outer packaging. They do like to do a tactile packaging every now and then. And this one has some of those similar tie-dye or striped type of shades like America's Parks has. I think this might be another trick of the background packaging because the Safari palette is a warmer toned packaging. I think it makes these shadows look so much warmer in comparison to the side by side with the Berlin palette in the pans. But in the swatches, I think they look so much more similar. Am I imagining that, or are you seeing the same thing? Keep in mind, I'm swatching this on my own arm, so It could also be a factor of the skin tone that these are swatched on. But I think that just like the Chicago Speakeasy palette, these look more dissimilar in the pan and a lot more similar and dupable in swatch. Last but never least, my favorite Nomad palette. This is the Ghost Town USA palette, and this one is decidedly more cool toned. There are a few warmer leaning shades in this palette, but in general, overall, there's a lot more cool toned presence here in comparison to the Berlin Underground. By this point, I was questioning, is it just the background color that's making me think this because of my previous two experiences? And I think it's maybe a little bit of both in this particular instance. These are decently similar in swatch, but not quite as close as the Safari palette that we just looked at. In general, Ghost Town USA, especially in the front half of those swatches, is pulling a lot more cool toned. However, the last six-ish shades between that bright silver and the matte black, those are really, really similar. So this one is sort of a 50-50 match in my opinion. But hey, I'll take any excuse to pull out my Ghost Town USA palette because, like I said, it's one of my favorites. So, if you're shopping on the Nomad site, I do recommend checking that one out as well. Ultimately, I think that I'm most interested in this Berlin Underground palette, probably just because it's the one that I haven't experienced and I don't have the old version. So it's just the newest and probably most intriguing for that reason. But it is undeniably a color story that I love. It's my everyday, my favorite go-to type of colors. So it's no wonder that my number one pick from this 10th anniversary trio is the Berlin Underground palette. That's my number one. That's the one I would recommend the most if you're going to shop from this release. Obviously, I have a special place in my heart for the Provence palette. This is what I would put in my number two recommendation spot. Whether you're just not interested in adding more neutrals to your collection, the Berlin Underground is something you already have, or for whatever reason, if that one's not on your radar, then I would highly, highly recommend putting this Provence palette on your radar instead. It's by far the most special of the three, in my opinion. It's just a beautiful, interesting, offbeat, unique color story. Gorgeous packaging, very painterly in a way that appeals to me. So I really love it. Second place is almost not enough for the Provence palette. It's like tied for first with the Berlin palette. The least intriguing to me is this America's Parks palette. However, I will say overall, in my experience, limited experience, it's the most improved overall from the reformulation. So I would love to hear what you think about this palette relaunch. Are you interested? Are you picking any of these up? I always love to hear what you think about things too. So thank you so much for watching. Thanks for hanging out with me. I absolutely love your face, and I will see you real soon in the next one. Bye.